What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the channel. Like, share, subscribe, comment, IG, TikTok, bottom of the video, and just gonna hop right into it. So today we will be doing a breakdown of day one of Tupac's murder case, who was on trial, Duane Keefe Davis. So I know I'm like a day or two behind. I was gonna do one and two together, but I decided to give each day its own thing. So let's get into it. If you haven't been here before, when we do stuff like this, I like to, preface things and then, put audio clips to support those things. And then give my opinions and things at ends or like during cuts. So obviously, you start with opening statements. So the prosecution obviously started with their opening statements of their case, why they're bringing a case against Duane Davis. What the prosecution basically start with, they start with the actual event, but then they go back and start with all of the events that led up to the fight. The prosecution discusses gang beef back in Compton, because if you didn't know, Tupac died in Las Vegas. What have made K cause tension between these two factions that they're about to talk about. A brawl that was about 2.5 hours before the shooting of Tupac.
Duane Davis did not pull the trigger. But what he did do was plan the retaliation for the beating of his nephew. You will learn that Duane Davis got the gun. You will learn that he got into a white Cadillac. You will learn when the opportunity presented itself for retribution, Duane Davis made sure that the shooters were armed and ready to execute their revenge. And remarkably, you will learn that from Duane Davis himself. But in the mid-1990s, those 10 square miles were occupied by over 30 gangs claiming its territory. And important to this case, there are two gangs, Mob Piru and the Southside Compton Crips. Let's talk a little bit about the Mob Piru. The Mob Piru is a group that associated with the color red. And you'll hear that Suge Knight, the person who was driving Tupac Shakur that night, grew up in the neighborhood of Mob Piru. But by the mid-1990s, he had become a very successful CEO of the record label Death Row Records. But despite, or maybe because of where he came from, you'll hear that Suge Knight continued to employ Mob Piru gang members as part of Death Row. They would act as unofficial security, and other times they would engage in, let's call them other acts, on behalf of Suge Knight. But Death Row in the mid-1990s was one of the most successful record labels around. They had artists such as Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, and of course, Tupac Shakur. And in 1996, Tupac Shakur was maybe the largest and biggest, most successful rapper around. He had just sold, released All Eyes on Me, a double album that was met with huge success. Additionally, Tupac Shakur was a movie star, having appeared in a number of movies in critically acclaimed roles. He has, at times, been referred to as an icon. But for the purposes of this case, what you need to know is that Tupac Shakur was not a gangster. He was a hip-hop artist associated with the Mob Piru. Now, the other gang that's important to know here is the Southside Compton Crips. And when it comes to Southside, Duane Keefe D. Davis was the leader of the Burris Street faction of the Southside Compton Crips. And while Suge Knight rose to prominence in his neighborhood due to the money that he was bringing in through the music industry, Duane Davis rose to prominence in his neighborhood because he was a very successful, large-scale drug trafficker. And you will learn that that is how one moves up in the world of gangs, by bringing in money to the neighborhood. The other thing you'll learn is that Orlando Baby Wayne Anderson was his nephew, and also a highly respected member of the Southside Compton Crips. Now, as part of this case, you're going to hear another name. Eric Zip Martin. Now, Eric Zip Martin is not a member of the Southside Compton Crips. In fact, he's based out of New York. He's involved in the drug trade and knows Duane Davis as a result of both their involvements in the drug trade. Sean Combs wanted some security when he came out to the West Coast. He was worried about Mob Piru. He was worried about the members of Death Row Records. And so Duane Keefe D. Davis agreed to be around to act as unofficial security for Sean Combs and his artists when they came out west. In order specifically to ensure there are no problems with Mob Pyro and Death Row Records. And this took a rivalry between Mob Pyro and Southside Compton Crips and escalated it. And those tensions boiled over in the Lakewood Mall in the summer of 1996. There, you'll hear that Trayvon Lane, a member of the Mob Pyro, associated with Death Row Records, was there with other members of Mob Pyro in order to do some shopping. Lakewood Mall was a mall nearby Compton. You'll also hear that Baby Lane Anderson, Orlando Anderson, the defendant's nephew, was there. Now, Trayvon Lane that day was wearing a chain with a Death Row medallion. And there was a fight that occurs between the Mob Pyro group and the Southside Compton Crips. And at one point, that chain is pulled off Trayvon Lane's neck. Now, what happened to that chain is an issue of much dispute. Not everybody agrees with it. But the act of disrespect of pulling the Death Row chain and the brawl that occurs further escalates this heated rivalry. And what you'll learn is that these two men, Trayvon Lane and Orlando Baby Lane Anderson, they encounter each other again. This time in Las Vegas. So that brings us back up to September 7th, 1996, here in Las Vegas. Again, Mike Tyson is fighting Bruce Sullivan. He disposes of him in less than in a round. Doesn't take a full round. And then after the fight, Tupac Shakur, Suge Knight, and the people that are here with, they leave. And among his group is Trayvon Lane. And that is why this fight occurs. Trayvon Lane and the Death Row group sees Orlando Anderson standing by himself, and they decide to attack him in retribution for what happened at the Lakewood Mall. You'll see Orlando Anderson's on the bottom of that group. You see security coming, trying to break this up. And then you'll see Tupac Shakur, Suge Knight, Trayvon Lane, and that group exit the MJ Grand.
I group all those in together because basically this is how they flowed. So obviously what you got from that is that Death Row Records, obviously the Suge Knight and who signed Tupac, were associated with Mob Pyru really through Suge Knight's neighborhood ties. They had some type of beef with the Southside Compton Crips that getting imploded, basically, between the West and East Coast beef with Suge Knight and Diddy. This led to obviously the Lakewood Mall incident between Orlando Anderson and Trayvon Lane. Then obviously they seen Orlando Anderson. Then they seen Orlando Anderson at the MGM Resort, and obviously they got down on him, and then eventually that led to them retaliating and the shooting of Tupac Shakur. So that's obviously the short version of it. So the prosecution, that goes on for a little bit more. They went on for a while with these opening statements, and the next thing that they did was the recordings of Keefe D and basically him self-snitching. So I'm gonna put one in here, but it's way more. You go if you want to go watch the whole live trial day one.
And this is how Duane Davis explains the murder of Tupac Shakur.
Yeah. People go with the stroke right here. Then we came up Harlem at the Long Way Boulevard. And shit. Here they come in that BMW and here you corner. I'm brawling. Tupac! I was like, there you go. Yeah, the U-turn, we wasn't supposed to make they was in the middle lane. We just pulled up on the side and checked every car to see where they was.
So what directed your attention to him was some girl shouting at Tupac?
Tupac, he gave us another way. Otherwise, they would have gone away. He already done what you want to do. They was
You did a U-turn, so then you pull alongside of it. You guys were in the car. Have you already handed him the gun at this point, or at what point did you hand him the gun?
I thought he was going to pull on my side. You know, that's one of them that going to the out for him. You know, and he pulled on his side.
So you were fitting a blast if you had to, or you were just...
Yeah, we would have been on my side, I was there.
Okay. So you hand the gun to the back seat.
Yeah.
You hear bang?
I gave it to Dre. Dre was like, no. And Lane's like, dude, fuck, dude.
So what you hear Duane Davis say, admit that as they see Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight driving to Club 662, Duane Davis, along with Terrence Brown, DeAndre Smith, and Orlando Anderson, decide to make a U-turn, confront Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight. Duane Davis has the firearm. It's the firearm he got from Eric Von Zit Martin, and then he passes it to the back. Duane Davis says that if they were on his side, if Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight were on his side of the vehicle, he would have shot them himself. But because they were on the other side, he handed it to DeAndre Smith. DeAndre Smith, according to Duane Davis, did not want to shoot at that time, so Orlando Anderson shot into that car.
So from there, obviously, you know, that's just him on recording, explaining the whole incident. He has done this on multiple platforms, multiple recording. If you have been familiar with this case, that's basically really why the case got, you know, brought to trial anyway, because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. You know, obviously he explains the whole details that T. Brown was in the driver's seat. He was in the front passenger seat. Orlando Anderson was sitting behind him in the rear passenger seat, and DeAndre Smith was in the rear driver's side seat. And understandable, you know, he passed the gun back. Orlando ended up, I guess, taking it from Dre because Dre didn't want to shoot, and that's what happened. Number of things with that. After that, you know, the defense is open to statements. The defense, he had multiple points, obviously, on how he's going to defend his case. But one of them was how terribly the police ran and how corrupt the police were at that time. He made a couple points, basically, that because there was so many police departments involved with the Las Vegas Metro, then you had the Los Angeles police, and then at the time you had the Compton Police Department. You know, he basically talks about, shows how, they weren't properly ran. They didn't, a lot of people didn't properly document the case, or one person specifically didn't properly document the case. How, they were basically playing games with each other and not giving each other the honest truth. And it led to a lot of discrepancies in this case.
Wanted to know answers to the question as to what happened and who did this to Tupac Shakur. Now, what you're going to find is, when Detective Becker testifies in this case, that a lot of his reports are now missing. They're gone. Which is Metro's responsibility to hold and to pass on to the next detective, and then finally to the next detective. Now, Detective Becker also did not trust Compton PD. Why is that important in this case? Because there's an individual by the name of Reggie Wright Sr. He was a lieutenant working in Compton in charge of the gangs in Compton in terms of investigations. His son is Reggie Wright Jr. He was the head of security for Death Row Records, the same security that was here in Las Vegas on the 9th of September 7th, 1996. Death Row Records was affiliated with Mob Pyru Blood, and Detectives Ladd and Brennan from Compton answered directly to Reggie Wright Sr. Becker did not trust Compton PD. And the one thing that he really didn't trust is that most of their information came from confidential informants that were not reliable. And he'll tell you that. And because of his intuition, Compton PD was shut down in September of 2000 due to internal corruption. They just evaporated that Police Department and the Sheriff's Department for LA County absorbed the responsibilities for the Police Department in Compton because of the corruption that was there. Now what facts, right? Just like the pads of paper that you have in your hand and the pens that you have in your hand, what facts can we determine from Detective Becker's efforts? First and foremost, we know that Tupac was shot multiple times. That's a fact. That can be proven. We know that it was with a .40 caliber firearm. That's a fact, due to the cartridge casings. On the corner of Flamingo and Cobalt. That's also a fact. Right? We're on board so far? We know the date, September 7th, 1996. That is a fact. At 11:17 p.m., we know that to be a fact as well. And then finally, that he was in a vehicle during election night, and that Tupac died 6 days later. Those are facts that will not be refuted by anybody in this courtroom during the time that we spend together. But here's the one thing. There are no facts to point to Keefe. Not one. And you're going to hear about this over and over and over again. No facts like the microphone in your hand or the pad of paper that you have that you write on. Detective also encountered some challenges in this case. They had to hide the case file with Metro because people were still accessing the file in Metro and they weren't authorized to do so. So they changed the case number so that people couldn't find the file. In addition to that, what you're going to learn is LAPD reached out to them, called them up and said, hey, Detective Long, we have the gun. And we've tested it and it matches back to what you're looking for in terms of the weapon that killed Tupac Shakur. Detective Long goes to LAPD, gets the gun, transports it back, gets it tested, and it comes out as not a match. LAPD tells him after, we gave you a fake gun to test you out. This is the level of, I don't know how to put it, that was going on during this time period between Metro, LAPD, and Compton. This is what's happening during this time period. Leads, according to Detective Long, became very scarce and stale, meaning that it was just taking a long time for him to follow up with people. Witnesses became unavailable. Why do you think that is? Because of time. So as a result, memories started failing because of that time. So Detective Long had these challenges. But here's what Detective Long does. He interviews Keefe in 2009. Sits him down, has an interview with Keefe, just like the state said. And guess what happens? Detective Long doesn't even know that Keefe had actually spoken to a task force the year before. How is that possible? Metro is the agency responsible for the investigation of Tupac Shakur's murder, and they don't even know about this. No one in that room in 2008 told Detective Long or Metro what was going on. And you know who was in the room in 2008? You had FBI in the room. You had DEA in the room. You had LAPD in the room.
1, 2, 3, it's about 4. Snoop Doggy Dogg and Dr. Dre.
If you're dry on cash,
You had the United States Attorney for the Central District of California in that room. And Detective Long does not know about any of that. What you will also learn is out of all those people in that room, not one person verifies what KPD tells them. That the FBI, the gold standard of investigation in our country, did not go out and follow up on what was said. Now, one of the things the state showed you was a picture of a car and indicated there was 4 individuals in that car. And he tell you that at some point, 3 of those individuals are dead and Keefe's the only one that's remaining. But at the time that he gives his statement to the task force in 2008, there's another individual that's still alive. They never interviewed that individual to verify if that information was true. Why not? Because the FBI just fell asleep? That the LAPD just didn't care? Keefe was never charged for any of what he said during that time period. And it's because they knew he was full of crap. Otherwise they would have. Why wouldn't they? When Detective Long comes back to Las Vegas, he goes and he talks it over with the Clark County District Attorney's Office. And you know what happened then? They didn't charge the case either. In 2009. Ask yourself the reason why that is. It's because they just didn't care about Tupac Shakur or his life? Or is it because they looked into it and realized we can't verify this information, we don't believe this to be true? Why would the Clark County District Attorney's Office not charge him?
One thing he did say I thought was an interesting point, and I was thinking about it the whole time, which is the fact that Keefe D might, this could probably really more help his case. I think that he's the only person alive from the incident. They'll get into it later about what happened to well, they never really speak on what happened to. I know Orlando Anderson died as well in a gang violence shooting in L.A. or Compton. I can't remember what they said about T. Brown, and I want to say DeAndre Smith, like, he died later in life from, like, not natural causes, but not nothing like gunshot wound inflicted. But he also brings up that Keefe D has been interviewed and talked to multiple times by law enforcement over the years about this Tupac case. One of them was a secretly held meeting in 2008 with a task force. During that, even though it was one more person alive, and I think it was DeAndre Smith, I want to say, and they've never, interviewed or tried to prosecute anybody else when it came to this case. The timing of the arrest he brought up because, like I said, they went through all these investigations there was one in 2008, there was another meeting in 2009. He wrote a book in 2019. It was just a couple times where it was like if they were going to like try to prosecute him, why didn't they prosecute him then? That's a question he tried to bring up. He brought up a Mr. Mogg, or at the time who was a Detective Mogg, who was working for, was a detective for the Las Vegas Metro Police Department, but then he retired and ended up becoming an independent contractor for the district attorney's office, where he remained the lead investigator on the case. And he was basically acknowledging how that Mr. Mogg didn't write a report about the case until 5 weeks before trial, and how Mr. Mogg as well they kind of did something weird with the procedural, because how does he remain the lead investigator when the usual procedural things with that is that it goes to the next detective. So he brought that up.
To what he's saying to this judge to be true and correct. What he says is, I think we have evidence in Keefe D's home that will solve the murder of Tupac. So up until this point, they've got all these statements, they can't be corroborated. So now they're saying, we have evidence in this home that we think probably is in the home. And as a result, we're going to find this evidence. It's going to help us solve this case. What I'm going to tell you right now is that you don't find it. And in the meantime, Detective Mogg retires. He now becomes Mr. Mogg. And Mr. Mogg goes to the grand jury. And in the grand jury, it's a secret procedure.
Only Brawny has 3 plies, and it's stronger than Bounty.
Never rush to sue the other driver after a car accident. There may be a much smarter way to get paid.
We're not there. The defense, isn't sitting like we are here. It's just the prosecutors. There's a panel of people called the grand jurors, and you have people come up and they testify under oath. And there's really no way for the defense to challenge any of it because it's done in secret. We don't really know about it. But in this particular case, Mr. Mogg is sworn to testify truthfully. And you know what Mr. Mogg does? He just reads pages of the book into the record. He doesn't do any more in terms of an investigation than read pages of a book into the record. He never documents in any of his efforts any verification of the book before he reads it into the record. He walks up, gets on the stand, and reads the book as if it's the gospel truth. And that's what he does. He treats that book like it's fact. Now, What you're going to find out about Mr. Mogg is that he never wrote a report. So when he took over the case in 2017, all the way up until when he retired in 2023 and was in front of the grand jury, he never wrote a report. Not one time. Not like Detective Becker, and not like Detective Long, and not like any other police officer who does their job. This man never writes a report. In fact, what happens is he transitions, right? He's a Metro detective, he retires, and then he gets a job working as an independent contractor for the district attorney's office as an investigator. And as an investigator, he doesn't have any police power. He continues to work as a lead detective on this case. Even though the procedure is you hand your file and your officer's report to the next detective in line. That's how this works. But he keeps the file for himself and he starts billing against the file after he retires as a detective at Metro. Because now he's an independent contractor. That's important to know. Why is that important? Because what the evidence is going to show you is that he backloaded his work. And when he finally writes a report, it's not an officer's report, it's an investigative report that spans from 2018 to current, and we just received it about 5 weeks ago. The importance of capturing everything you do, the accuracy that you would need to be able to be in court on a murder case, not some type of college paper that you forgot to do and then the last second just put something together and, get it out the door. Mr. Mogg does not do any of that. That's going to be important later for you to consider. Because according to that report that he submitted 5 weeks ago or so, he never verified the book. According to that report, he never investigated any of the alternate theories that were out there, and you're going to hear about those alternate theories. There are people who have developed over time answers to the question, who did this and why? He never looked into any of it.
He also brings up Reggie Wright Jr. and Sr. If you didn't know, Reggie Wright Sr. was the leader of the gang unit for the Compton Police Department when the Compton Police Department was a thing. He gets in this as well, as the Compton Police Department ended up getting basically dissolved in 2000 because of the amount of corruption, and then basically the LA Sheriff's Department took over Compton for the police duties. So I didn't know that. That was new information to me. I didn't realize Compton Police didn't exist anymore, but some things learn. But Reggie Wright Sr., like I said, was the head of the gang unit at that. Reggie Wright Jr. was actually the head of security at Death Row Records. Reggie Wright, they were concerned about, basically, the motivations and the conversations having between, the family and things of that sort. And later, how Reggie Wright Jr. was also, kind of acting suspect on the night of, where he told the security not to be armed with Suge Knight and them, as well as an ulterior motive that was possible is that when Suge Knight got in trouble for getting into a fight in Las Vegas because it violated his probation, even though before the shooting, that Reggie Wright Jr. assumed control of Death Row Records. So he had an ulterior motive. It was just a lot of things that could have pointed to Reggie Wright Jr. as well. So
first person is this guy named Reggie Wright Jr. He's the security company for Death Row. First person is this guy named Reggie Wright Jr. He's the security company for Death Row Records. And what he is a felon. Second of all, you're also going to find that he's a former Compton police officer. He worked for Compton PD for about 5 years, and apparently he got disabled. At some point, he becomes a felon. You're going to learn about that. And his father, like I said before earlier, Reggie Wright Sr. was the head of the Compton PD gang unit. What you're also going to learn about Reggie is that, once again, he was supposed to be protecting Suge Knight. Where was he the night of the shooting? In addition to that, he orders his security team to not carry firearms the night of the shooting, before the shooting took place. What you're also going to learn is He wasn't even around when the shooting occurred. So the principal, meaning the person he should have been protecting the most, would have been Suge Knight, the head of Death Row Records. This man was nowhere to be found. He was sitting at a club called 662 down the street, waiting for Suge to show up, while he left his people that were working for him unarmed in the vehicles behind Suge Knight. And when push comes to shove, he orders his people to lie to police during their investigation. That's going to be called by that. That guy's going to be called by that. In addition to that, when everything was said and done, Suge Knight went to prison because he was not supposed to be in a fight in Las Vegas. He violates his release. Guess who takes over Death Row Records? Reggie Wright Jr. Now, the state is also going to bring in other people with unreliable positions, including criminal histories, financial motivations, and inconsistent statements. That are the people and the quality of the evidence that you're going to listen to in this case.
Then they brought the first witness. First witness was Gary Dale. He used to work for the Las Vegas Metro Police during the time of the murder. He didn't really give anything that added to it, so skip him. The second witness that they brought up was Ingrid Stokes currently, but at the time she was Ingrid Johnson. And she was not an eyewitness to it because she stated how her friend knew Suge, so they were trying to, they were talking to Suge, trying to see what was going on for the rest of the night. They were trying to follow Suge to the club. End up the entourage, was driving aggressively, trying to get around them, basically. So they almost about took a new route to the club. And during them trying to regroup themselves for half a second, that's when the shooting happened. She basically talked about how she heard it but didn't see it, but she did see the car that did it, which was the white. She couldn't describe what kind of car it was, but everybody's described it as the white Cadillac that Keefe did, and the other three were in.
When you say you ran into them, what'd that look like?
Well, we were driving, hanging out in a convertible, and my girlfriend Lauren at the time, she knew Suge, and she told us, "Hey, there's Suge. Pull up next to him. I'm gonna ask them what they're doing." And so Shalane was the driver, and she slowed up close to them.
And so you said Shalane was the driver.
Yes.
Where were you seated?
I was a passenger in front.
In the front passenger?
Yes.
So Shalane's driving, you're in the front passenger, and the other two women are in the back seat?
Yeah, Tanisha's behind me, and then Lauren is behind the driver.
After all these years, you still remember that, huh?
Well, yeah. Some things you don't forget. That one you forget.
And so then when you start driving, or when you see Suge, and your friend starts talking to Suge, what happens?
They were talking, and she was like, "What's going on? What's happening?" We look over, and then we pull up to the car, and we kind of nod or say hello, that kind of thing. But we were in our own little world. While she was talking to him, he said, "Hey, we're all going to the club. Why don't you follow us? Get behind us. You can go with us." And so that was decided we'll go there first and see what's happening before we go anywhere else.
So do you follow, do you remember who's driving and who's in the passenger side?
Suge was driving, and Tupac was in the passenger seat.
All right. I believe States Exhibit 3 has already been admitted. We're going to publish that. Is this kind of the way they look at night?
Yeah, that was just like this.
And so, you decided to follow Suge and Tupac to the club?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a yes?
Yes, I'm so sorry, yes.
That's okay.
Head down, taking our seatbelts off when we heard the gunshots, when it's all hell broke loose.
And to be fair, you didn't see those gunshots.
No.
And then what do you do when you hear the gunshots?
I freak out and I scream, "What the hell?" I said, "What the hell?" And then Shalane is kind of half up, half down, and so I grab her head to bring her down. And I was like, "What the hell is going on?" And then she has her hand on the wheel, but she's like frozen. And so I don't remember how many gunshots there were, honestly. But I know I put the car in drive, and I told her to get the hell out of there and drive. And so I may even grab the wheel. Like I said, I'm very aggressive. And from that, she tried to drive off.
And then did you see the color of the vehicle?
Yeah, so we almost hit the car. When we were trying to drive off, there was a car in the lane, that last lane, that was the turning lane, and it was a white four-door. Can't tell you what kind, but I just know it was like white-ish. And we
something interesting. She didn't give too much after that because one, like I said, she didn't see it. She just seen the car and all things of that sort. But one, I did think interesting her cross examination that the defense tried to ask her about if Tupac was hanging out the window and things of that sort. Because I have heard that before, that Tupac might have been hanging out the window and that was drawing attention to himself. So I guess that was something that the defense was trying to use against him if she had said yes. But she said no, he wasn't doing that.
As you're sitting there and you pull up, Tupac was not hanging out the window and doing something out of the window.
Absolutely not. No.
Okay. No. His torso was not sitting on top of the window yelling to his fans, Tupac, Tupac.
No, there was no fans around. They were just driving in the car, listening to music like we were.
All right. And during that.
So the next witness they brought up was Brett Becker. He retired. He's a retired police officer from the Las Vegas Metro Police Department. Said he was a homicide detective, or at the time. And a couple things I found interesting is that one, they called homicide to the scene, even though Pac wasn't deceased at the time, because if you didn't know, he died 6 days later. So they did say that might have been just because of the who it was and like basically how big the case was
out there.
Is it somewhat unusual for homicide to be involved in a situation where there isn't a deceased victim yet?
That was very unusual, and normally we don't get called out, at least at that time, we didn't get called out unless there was a deceased victim. So it was unusual. I think when we arrived at the scene, we were told that because of the nature of who the victim was, General Assignment wanted us to come out to it.
Let me ask you, we've heard from a first responder today. Back in those days, what was general assignment? What does that mean?
General assignment was in essence, the night detectives. They worked swing shift and graveyard shift. So they were the night detectives that if something needed a detective to respond, they were the ones that got called out to the scene.
So they would have been at this scene before you, and then they made a determination along with, I assume, the command staff that homicide should be called out to this investigation.
Correct. Actually,
they told him that they seen the white Cadillac as well that Keefe D and everybody else has described.
Alexander, Malcolm Greenidge, Katari Cox, and Yafu Fula, and I'm just doing what I remember the pronunciation was. They were in the car behind Suge Knight and Tupac Shakur, and what they described was that a white car, and from what I recall, they described a white Cadillac pulling up alongside Knight's car, and someone inside that white Cadillac opening fire or shooting into the car that Knight and Shakur were at. Their descriptions varied a little bit, but from what I recall, I believe they all said it was a white car and more or less agreed that it was a Cadillac. And there might have been a little bit of a variance between 2 and 4 occupants.
Another interesting point, he didn't add too much to it. I mean, basically he was like regurgitating the facts of, them, the car, who it was, the prior beefs, things of that sort that was basically laid out in the beginning. One thing I did find it interesting that they said that when they showed the film of the fight, like that happened before the shooting to the Los Angeles Police Department, that they immediately the Compton Police Department, they immediately recognized Orlando Anderson.
Showed them the videotape from the MGM. Were they able to identify for you, first of all, who Orlando was?
They immediately recognized Orlando Anderson. They told us that's Orlando Anderson.
And do they also identify some of the people that are with Suge that you didn't know might have been with Suge?
They recognized Suge Knight. I think they did by monikers, if I remember right. There might have been names. I think Buntry was in the picture, a guy named Buntry. There may have been some others that would have, again, it would be on the report because we did document all this.
Does Trayvon Lane sound familiar to you?
Yes, Trevon Lane does sound familiar.
What about Neckbone?
They ended up identifying a bunch of people because we ended up getting a substantial amount of information from them.
And a lot of cops had said that in this case that, like, Orlando Anderson, I was just wondering, what the hell was Orlando Anderson doing while he was alive? And he was young as hell, like, he was my age and younger. The fuck could he have done in that short time period to be remembered like this? Like, that boy, wow. The last witness that they brought up and I thought was very interesting was Fred Miller. Now, Fred Miller was actually a former Los Angeles Police Department. He worked in robbery and homicide. So the reason they brought Fred Miller up, which was crazy to me, and I'm trying to understand. Well, I'm trying to understand where the prosecution is going with this, but they brought Fred Miller because he was actually on the Biggie case. So this is actually a bigger thing because he had actually investigated and interviewed Keefe during the Biggie case. So they had, and he, said in his testimony that they did at the time have Duane Keefe Davis as a suspect in the Biggie case as well. Because one, they said it was over some type of money dispute. And they said that may be a reason he, might have tried to do something to Biggie. But
during the course of your investigation, did you receive information that a person by the name of Duane Davis might be a suspect in this homicide?
Yes, we did.
I think he's frozen just a Okay. And in addition to that, did you learn that Duane Davis was present at the the Peterson Automotive Museum during the party?
Yes, he was.
Did you also receive information that he potentially had a motive to harm Mr. Smalls because of some sort of monetary dispute?
Objection is a leading.
What's your response?
I'm just trying
There
to
was
lay a
some-
foundation through video.
Overruled. I'll allow it given the circumstances. You can answer, Mr. Miller.
He's not frozen.
basically, he tried the prosecution as well. That's not added on the case, but they have brought up a lot of information forward about the murder of obviously Christopher Wallace, which is Biggie, and how Duane Davis may have been somewhere involved in that. And I don't know what the prosecution's idea with that. I think the prosecution may be trying to paint a picture of that Duane Keefe Davis is like a threat, so that if he could have did this and he said all these things and admitted to it as well, and he admitted that and he's also been very suspect and has close ties of doing it to Biggie, that he had to do this to Tupac. Like, there's no way he's not guilty of this. So that's maybe the thing they try to do. I don't like the route, honestly. Out of the first day, I will say I do like what the defense is doing. I don't know if he'll get off. Like, at first, I mean, obviously, it's still early, but it's gonna be hard for me to think that he'll get off just because he said so much, so many platforms, audio record, and his story is pretty consistent every time that we damn near all know the story if you have been keeping up just like the whole layout of the whole night, just because he's talked so much. But I do. What the lawyer is doing is very intelligent. He's pointing out that it's a lack of procedural issues. It's a lack of communication between the police departments. It's some corruption going on somewhere. It's not as much like it's a lack of evidence pointing towards Keefe D. I said like physical evidence pointing towards Keefe D. A lot of it is just him talking too much, and then they just brought the charges out of nowhere. So I do like what the defense lawyer. I don't know who he is. I've never seen him before, but he is a hell of a lawyer, it seems like, and shit, I like what you're doing. I don't know if I'm not a fan of what the prosecution is doing at this moment in time, but shit, we're gonna see. But that's really all I gotta say though. So like, share, subscribe, comment, ID, TikTok, bottom of the video, and we up.